What do the French want? A leader who respects the will of the people or one that gets things done? In his primetime address, the term-limited Emmanuel Macron acknowledged how deeply unpopular his pension reform is. But now that it's been railroaded through Parliament, now that it's been validated by the courts and enacted by the president himself, he assured that it's for the best and says it's time to move on to the rest of his laundry list of reforms. The nearly two-thirds of citizens who oppose raising the retirement age from 62 to 64 say they're not ready to turn the page. On the left, unions call for a mass turnout in May 1st Labor Day marches. Vying for the same working-class voters who feel the French welfare state has betrayed them again is the far right, which happens to boast the largest opposition voting bloc in Parliament. Its message is not see you in the street, but see you at the polls. Only time will tell if Macron can rebound from what is yet another crisis. Back in 2017, he won the presidency for the first time with no party to back him, without ever having run for elected office before. He then bounced back from the yellow vests, COVID, the spillover effect of the war in Ukraine. He won re-election. A Midas touch, if you imagine Midas as, well, a technocrat by training, who even when he loses, his party failed to garner an outright majority in last year's legislative elections, somehow still manages to get his way. What does that say about Macron? What does it say about France and its politics? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the French president who's shrugged off the anger over pension reform. Joining us, Elisabeth Pinault, who follows French politics for the Reuters news agency. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good evening.
Busy.
Well, busy as usual, but yes, it's a busy time with Macron on the TV yesterday, and he's going to the east of France tomorrow, and I'll be with him.
You'll be following him to Alsace?
Yeah, I'll be traveling with him on the train.
Welcome as well, Charlotte Maviel, co-chair of the UK chapter of the French Green Party. Nice to see you not on Skype.
I know, nice to see you in person.
Thank you for being with us. From Nottingham, historian Paul Smith, associate professor at the University of Nottingham. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. So Monday, a 13-minute speech that went to script, a little bit of acknowledgement, a lot of let's move on. Clémence Waller has more.
Has he found the words to convince the French public? On Monday evening, President Emmanuel Macron sought to appease an angry country just 72 hours after passing his controversial pension reform bill.
Is this reform accepted? Obviously not. And despite months of consultations, a consensus has not been found, and I regret this. We all must learn a lesson from this.
In Nice, the owner of this restaurant was hoping for conciliatory words from the French leader. After 3 months of strikes and protests, he hopes life will go back to normal. While he supports the reform, he regrets the way it was brought about.
I think the pension reform in the long run will be beneficial for the future of our grandchildren and for the generation to come. But this was not the way to do it. It was too brutal, imposed on us.
From the Élysée Palace, Emmanuel Macron says he wants to tackle several sectors: law, order, and as a priority, employment.
To improve the incomes of employees, to make careers progress, to better share the wealth, to improve working conditions, to find solutions to professional wear and tear, to increase the employment of seniors and to help with retraining.
In his speech, the president said he wanted to work with the different political groups. However, some of his opponents said they were unmoved by his offer.
Perhaps he wants to bring some people to the right, I don't know. But I think he doesn't realize that he's increasingly alone in the country.
The president has instructed his prime minister, Elisabeth Borne, to present a detailed action plan next week.
Elisabeth Pinault, were there surprises in that address on national television?
No, not really. We were not expecting much, and we didn't get a lot. But there was a paradox about that. He had to do it, but he could say nothing. He couldn't, promise billions of euros to stop the anger. He had to explain. He wanted to move on. We knew that.
You heard that restaurant owner in that report saying
yes.
He wanted the words that would comfort, that would reconcile, and he didn't seem to find them. Is that?
Well, we'll see. Where he was smoother than 2 weeks ago when he was on TV, and he was rather hard with his opponents. Yesterday, he clearly wanted to explain, but he was not so smooth, I agree. That was not Macron's style. He wanted to be heard. He wanted to heal the wounds. He wanted to open a new chapter, definitely. 15 million people watch him, which is quite a lot. So we'll see if he... but it won't be enough, of course. You know, he has to go and see people face to face. That's what he's going to do now. He wants to go on the ground, and I think he's going to leave Paris several times per week to meet people like he did for the Grand Débat after the Yellow Vest a few years ago. But the time is different, and he really have to reconcile with people, and it won't be easy. He knows that.
All right, Paris traffic could not keep away political strategist Jean-Christophe Gallien. Thanks for joining us as well here.
Pleasure, thank you.
You mentioned how he wants a new chapter. Emmanuel Macron was something close to a bit of a Gallic shrug as he sat down this Tuesday morning with business leaders at the French presidential palace.
The door remains open. I understand that after May the 1st, some people will be ready to come back around the table to move forward.
May the 1st, when there are those big marches. Charlotte Mainviel, is it case closed, let's move on?
Well, clearly not. I think there's going to be a lot of people mobilized in the streets on the 1st of May, and rightly so. People are, as you were saying, 2/3 of French people disapprove of this reform, and we saw the speech of Emmanuel Macron was really empty and clearly out of touch of what's going on in the population at the moment. His discourse was really, his message seemed to be, you don't agree with my reform, but I don't care. And clearly, a lot of people were in the streets using different types of methods now. We saw people banging on saucepans, trying to be creative, because clearly being millions of people demonstrating in the streets doesn't seem to be enough to try and get some change. So they're trying to find other ways of being heard.
But tell us honestly, is there a bit of fatigue of being worn down at this point?
I mean, I think it's really, we have to consider that it's quite difficult for people to take days off to be able to go on strike. That's why they're trying to find other ways. But clearly the unions, as we've heard, Sophie Binet from the CGT was saying there's no way forward in this situation unless the reform is taken away. And we've seen Laurent Berger has said also that he's not going to meet with the president. So there's strong opposition, and the president seems to be stuck in his bubble of the Élysée Palace, not responding and not listening to the will of the people right now.
Is he in a bubble, Jean-Christophe Gallien, or is this a political calculation that he's made? It looks like he wanted to pick a fight. You heard Charlotte Mainviel mentioning the leader of the more moderate trade union confederation, the CFDT. It feels like Emmanuel Macron picked this fight, wanted this splendid isolation here.
Yeah, probably what happened yesterday is that he tried to size a moment of confusion in between the opponents, his own majority, and he was trying to accelerate the movement because he knew probably the unions had to wait the 1st of May to mobilize, to try to reshuffle the whole movement, which is all, of course, 3 months of fight for nothing. You have to understand that today, the ones that have lost actually for the people are the ones that were fighting against the reform. The vast majority of the French people, 62, 70. But at the same time, when you look at the polls during the whole period, everybody was against the movement. Everybody was, against that, not the movement, sorry, against the project, the reform of the pension project. But at the same time, the majority inside that majority was considering there was no way of winning. So it's quite
a bit of fatalism.
It's quite difficult to understand about
this.
That,
This is the front page of tonight's edition of the broadsheet of Record Le Monde. Yeah. He says Macron gives himself 100 days to hit the reset button.
It's only about that, Yesterday he was not at all considering any kind of.
But is this fictitious 100 days?
You can't understand that really, because normally it's at the start, at least at the start of the mandate, or at the end of the mandate. So he's like in between the same thing. So I'm not sure he's staying in the castle. He's trying to get out and trying to move off that, he's like in the ring, like in the corner of the ring, and he tries to size that moment to try to find a way, like in the military, we were talking at France 24 about the Ukraine war, for example, and they try to make a breach, how do you say that in English? Try to break through, exactly. And yesterday was that trying to do that. He started in a good probably the way he was, the only good point was in opening at the end of his speech yesterday, opening around the angers. He was
acknowledging.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not about probably around the pension movement.
But then he did the technocratic thing, which is to go down this long list of reforms.
When I listened to him yesterday, I was considering he was going to try to move on around, the inflation, the way he was talking about the work, and the way we were going to try to make the work of the people gaining a capacity for them to get a good life. It was that. And he kept on moving around this 3-point, we don't know what about.
Paul Smith, let me ask you, is this a man who's out of touch in the high halls of the French presidential palace, or is this the same Emmanuel Macron that we've all known since 2017?
Well, I think it's both, isn't it? I mean, that's part of his enigma, but part of his problem. It's very interesting. I was in France last week, and I noticed that most of the heavyweight political weeklies were focusing on the isolation of the man in the High Castle. But I think he's always been like this. We've talked about the president Jupiterian, and now he's doing what he always does, which is to pull out a gadget, as they say in French, a gimmick. So this idea of the 100 days, well, as Jean-Christophe just said, if he'd actually focused a bit more on the 100 days at the beginning of his presidency, we might not be in this situation. If he'd actually focused on the elections and got himself a majority, then he probably wouldn't be in this fix. But also the gadget of the notion of the pacte de la vie au travail, this working pact, this looking at conditions. The whole thing is part of his problem.
Yeah, he's. What is his support? Is my question, Paul? Because you look at the Fifth Republic and de Gaulle, when he set it up, he set up a system where the president is supposed to be above the fray, but the political parties still matter. And here's a guy who didn't come from a political party.
No, well, I think that's absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head. That actually, this is, though he's won 2 presidential elections, he's not what the French would call an homme du terrain. He's never really been through the ordinary electoral process, so he doesn't have that contact with people. He's not very good at dealing with intermediary bodies, trade unions, local government, with Parliament even. So he doesn't really get that, and he's very much the technocrat. And the technocrat believes that they know what the problem is, and they know what the solution is. This is what the whole, the idea of the reset, the whole idea of a new roadmap over the next 100 days. And it's really, I think, beginning to show the problem that he has, that he doesn't have that. He hasn't been through that process. Now, of course, de Gaulle hadn't, but de Gaulle was a rather different kind of proposition to Macron, and that's where he's. This is going to be very much like the Grand Débat. Right at the beginning there, Elisabeth was saying that she's going out to be with Macron as he goes out into the country, but this is going to be like the Grand Débat, and I really don't see.
Just remind our viewers that the Grand Débat was this sort of these town hall style meetings that he put in place after the Yellow Vest movement, or during rather the Yellow Vest movement.
Yes, and what was the outcome of that? Where are the results? The Grand Débat, there was it was very much controlled by Macron. He put together a committee that oversaw the whole process. Where's the outcome? And it's the same thing with after his election, the whole idea of the Conseil National de la Refondation, this idea of a national council that's going to talk about all the problems that France is facing, and nothing comes out of it.
A couple of questions on this, Elisabeth. First of all, our reporter Catherine Rostrand followed the president last Thursday when he went to visit the Notre Dame, where they're rebuilding the cathedral. Tight security. There was no chance of any protester getting anywhere near him.
That's a problem. Yeah, that's a problem now. He cannot go where he wants. They has to clear out everything and send hundreds of policemen, which is a problem because he wants to talk to people. And we'll see what's happening tomorrow near Strasbourg. I'm going with him, and we'll see if Igor is going to an enterprise specialized in wood. He wants to talk about future, about industry, and on Thursday he's going to the south of France to talk about education. So we'll see in those 2 places if he can talk to real people, like we said, because everybody says, his opponents say, that he's in his bubble in the Élysée, that he's stuck in a parallel world. That's what Marine Le Pen said yesterday night, that he's lost and he doesn't know what people are living. He doesn't realize how difficult it is to live, and he wants to show them. I suppose he wants to talk to them face to face. He knows that there are going to be arguments, and it won't be like the Grand Débat, because the moment is very different. At the time, he was, elected less than 2 years before. Now it's his second quinquennat, and he's really weakened. He's
Second
lost
5-year term.
Yes, 5-year term, and he's lost like more than 10 points in the polls in the last
Yeah,
week.
but French presidents are always unpopular.
Yes, you're right. But some people really hate him, and there is always he was elected to change people's life. I think that's really what he wants to do, by giving them work and changing and doing this reform to change people's life. But the contrary happens. People think that their life is getting worse and worse, and I'm surprised that he didn't talk about the cost of living yesterday. Apart from the wages, he didn't talk about that, and that's really the number one issue for the French people at the moment.
Yeah, the cost of living, especially with the high inflation. You heard Charles Maviel earlier talking about pots and pans during Macron's Monday night address. We saw some, like here in Bordeaux, they were organized throughout France by anti-globalization and left-wing activists. They accused Macron of pretending that a vote against the far right's Marine Le Pen in last year's presidential election runoff was a vote for pension reform.
They're trying to screw us. He claims he was elected for that. No. The only reason people rallied behind him was to fight against Marine Le Pen, to prevent the far right from coming. So no, this reform has no legitimacy. There is no justifiable reason to pass this reform.
And speaking of Marine Le Pen, as Elisabeth Pinault was saying, here's what the leader of the far-right National Rally Party tweeted after that Monday speech. This disconnected, solitary, and obtuse way of wielding power foreshadows a second mandate of contempt, indifference, and brutality that must end through the ballot box. And that's her message. And she rams it home, Jean-Christophe Cadien, the National Rally is anti-pension reform and pro-police, and says, don't go in the street, vote for us.
They're very quiet,
and they're doing really well.
No, they're
according to opinion polls,
exactly. They're not speaking. They're very quiet, and they're just gaining not only support, but probably things that would go in electoral value if there was tomorrow kind of an election in France, and 2024 will be the European parliamentary election, and then probably they would be scoring like parts of the left parties. But now, what's the fact? The facts are he has no majority. His own majority, French president is elected by the people. So he has a legitimacy, his own sovereignty. He has his majority, but it can't work without either a majority against him at the National Assembly or either his majority.
But he promised the second night of the legislative elections that he would reach out and do
but
deals.
It's impossible to do it like in a shopping way. You try to negotiate every kind of bill-to-bill majority, like Elizabeth Borne that tried to gain a coalition.
The Prime Minister.
Exactly. Tried to make it. That was a mandate for the last 2 weeks from Macron. It's impossible. They are going to be in the impossibility. Because of what? Because the Les Républicains, that were their only capacity to gain a support on a more than a 2 months period, something like government, a coalition, have lost the same, their own capacity to move in the project, what they wanted, the senior thing, was cleared off by the Constitutional Council. So that means they lost. The one that didn't want to collaborate have won inside Les Républicains. It's impossible for them now to work out a majority, even for the 100 days with the Les Républicains. There is no way for him to move in the parliament to work out something now. So this is becoming very tight now.
4 years though can be a long time.
That's why he's talking about 100 days. That's why
yeah.
he's talking about 100 days, and it goes to 14th of July.
Right.
And probably something will happen at that time.
On the hashtag F24 debate, Charles Manviel, Jane says, Macron's first election destroyed the traditional left and right. After this so far disastrous second term, his party will never win the next election. It's an open goal for the National Rally. After Macron, Le Pen?
Well, I think, first of all, who is guilty of the rise of the far right? I really think it's the government and the president, both because of the methods that they're using and the discourse that they're having. We've seen recently, for example, with Gérald Darmanin, the interior minister, criticizing, for example, a big human rights organization, saying maybe they shouldn't get funding from the state anymore. We've also seen this morning, Gabriel Attal, finance responsible minister, was saying that the scapegoats maybe are people on benefits, that maybe we should be trying to track if they're going away and
Okay, so Macron's tacking to the right.
He's tacking to the right.
But there's a difference between that and accusing the president of opening the path for what would be unprecedented, which is the far right entering government.
Well, I think, first of all, what we're seeing right now would not happen in any other European democracy, maybe apart from Hungary or from Poland. We have 2/3 of the population that's against this reform. We have all of the unions that are against this reform. This reform wasn't validated within Parliament. So all of these features, and the president and the government is saying we're not listening to all of this. So they're using authoritarian reforms, and actually we're seeing that in the streets right now. There are people that are there for a social reason, which is we disapprove of this reform, and also for democratic reasons. We're seeing both a social crisis as well as a democratic crisis. Of course, the social element of this reform being that people who are most marginalized and women are going to be the most affected by losing 2 years of leisure and of rest. But we're also seeing that there's a huge democratic problem with the way that Macron is exercising power right now. I think that's really, really worrying.
Paul Smith, is it more democratic where you are when you compare? I mean, you have an election in Britain where the Conservatives have a healthy majority after their win in 2019. Does that mean that whenever they pass legislation that it reflects the will of the people?
I don't know whether it reflects the will of the people, but I would say that we have a far right-wing government, whether we like it or not. It might be a conservative government. Certainly it's dominated by right-wingers here in the UK. We have we've had a series of Home Secretaries, so Interior Ministers, who've reduced our power to protest, our right to protest and express opposition. So I would say that the democratic process is actually under threat in right across the piece. It's not just in France or in Hungary or in Poland. I'd also say that this goes back a lot further. It's not Macron who's enabled the far right. The enabling of the far right goes back a lot further, and even the left has to take its responsibility. If we think about some of the policies that were pursued under Manuel Valls under the Hollande presidency. So the causes of that are much longer term. But I'd have to say that it's problematic from a democratic point of view, but that's not just in France.
Elisabeth Pinault, nonetheless, this system where you have this sort of silver bullet where you can railroad legislation through Parliament by turning it into a vote of confidence, it's difficult to explain to foreign audiences or to...
that's the way it is, and of course with the lack of majority in the parliament, it's not easy for Macron.
Do the French like it this way?
Well, that's the constitution.
Do they like this constitution this way?
The thing is, so far it was okay, but it changed when we turned the 7 years term to 5 years term.
For the president.
Yeah, for the president, many things change because of that, and I think that weakened the democracy. So if you touch the constitution, if you change the constitution, you have to be very careful. That we know. But it's true that there is a democratic problem right now, and Macron is conscious of that. He's trying to to talk about that with the other parties. But the situation, the problem is that he is weakened because it's his second term. He won't be re-elected because he cannot be re-elected a third time in France. So he hasn't got the power. He hasn't got the strength to make things change, and it won't.
Hang on, you say he doesn't have the power to change things. He just got his bill passed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And it was validated and rubber stamped by the Constitutional Council.
He's really weakened on a political.
You can win legislatively. You can win in the parliament, but you can lose politically or socially. That's really the point.
Does he have to make deals? He seems to have shown us he doesn't need to.
He's probably in the incapacity to make a deal. And again, if you look at the Républicains now, today they have kind of a nightmare,
This is
they
the
made the move,
party
exactly. They made the move in the
Conservatives.
Senate. They made the move partly at the National Assembly, and they lost because their whole gain was moved off, and the people that didn't want to work out with the government in their party are the ones that won. But you need to say something. If we had the same electoral system, not the political system, as Italy, for example, in 2017, you wouldn't have Emmanuel Macron. You would have the same Meloni. That means you would have either Jean-Luc Mélenchon or either Marine Le Pen, or already in 2017. So this is not a French problem. It's not a constitutional issue. It's something around what's around Europe today, and you can go to Finland, you can go to Italy, you can go parts of Spain. It depends, of course, at the end of the day. In England, it was, in UK, you have the same problem. But again, the whole legislative and the electoral system changes, but the trends are the same in the European society, at least in northern parts. It's working this way. But this Fifth Republic Constitution makes it difficult for the people. You need to be able to be very strong to move a win. He was able to do it in 2017. He was able, on his branding, his only Macron branding, without a party, to win the same time last time. After, you need to say, after the COVID, the whole period that was, kind of separation inside the society. But he lost when the whole political party came out again. He didn't kill the political parties. They came out in 2022 at the National Assembly. So that means France they are here, and he doesn't have.
But how much does France need these political parties, Charlotte Manviel? If you have these tools, these legal tools at your disposal to railroad through legislation.
Well, clearly, I think this is there's a lot of disdain for Parliament in the way that Macron is exercising power. I mean, to go back to what Paul was saying, I think at least in the UK we have a system where the parliamentary elections inform who's the government is going to be. In France, we have a system where the president has a lot of power, and I feel like now he's really exercising power in a way that goes against democracy. And it's not the first time that we've seen that Emmanuel Macron has showed a lot of disdain for his people. We've seen that during the Yellow Vest movement, that was stopped by COVID, but there was also a lot of anger of what he was doing then. And I also think that, for example, the Citizens' Assembly on climate was, the recommendations weren't respected. He said, okay, let's consult 150 citizens, let's give them time to think about recommendations around climate. And then what did he do? He didn't respect what the people were asking for. So I think it's a continuous thread and theme that we're seeing right now of not respecting the will of the people.
But at the same time, in these last months, 20 bills were voted thanks to agreements with. So it worked in a way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Except he's starting to lose support
Darmanin
this
morning said that he was counting on Les Républicains to push bills on immigration. So we'll see what's going to happen. But in the first month of this term, many bills, 24, I think, were voted thanks to agreements with the left and the right. So this
mostly the
lack of majority doesn't help, doesn't prevent Macron from pushing bills.
But the big shift was that 49.3 this time, on a very emblematic, dramatically speaking, that political, not economical, but political reform about the pension. That changed the whole thing because it was quite his defeat. He was announcing his defeat, his next defeat. The next time you have 49.3. Last time, 31st of October 2022, he had 60 votes in advance. This time was 9 votes. Next time, he won't be able to win the 49.3. He knows about that. He already knows about that. He can't win over that majority or minority.
Okay, except that in France, you have the political parties, and we've named a lot of them in this discussion so far. And you also have, this is something Napoleon understood, the high civil service. Emmanuel Macron became president at age 40 after first attending the most elite of Paris high schools, the exclusive National Business Administration School, ENA, one of the grandes écoles, as they're called, the great schools. His predecessor, François Hollande, attended not one but 3 grandes écoles. But he also had a track record as the leader of the Socialist Party, member of parliament, the mayor of a mid-sized town in central France. So Hollande, despite all his technocratic grooming, definitely came from the world of politics. Paul Smith, when you look at Emmanuel Macron, is he an outlier, being a child just of the high civil service?
Yes, he is. I mean, I can't think of another president. You know, de Gaulle, let's put de Gaulle to one side. There is no other president who had no experience of being elected. Okay, Georges Pompidou had only been deputy from 1968 to 1969, but he's very much a product of that system. And as you yourself have just said, even François Hollande or Jacques Chirac, these were trained technocrats, but they also had the experience of being elected at all kinds of different levels. And I think Macron, one of the things that Elizabeth was saying, and I think she's absolutely right, that Macron, when he addresses groups of people, he's very convincing, he's very good at that. But there is still this kind of, the link isn't quite made. So he hasn't really gone through the mill of universal suffrage. Yes, he's won a presidential election without a political party backing him, but actually, when we think about things now, traditional political parties, if we think about Le Pen, she didn't have a very big and powerful party behind her. This is becoming a pattern that is repeating itself. But to go back to your original question, yeah, he's absolutely the pure technocrat, but the problem is that he's not really rooted in local.
Otherwise put, Paul, is the problem that he's not used to losing. I mean, he never loses, it seems. Even when he didn't have the votes this time, he still managed to get his bill passed.
Well, yes, I think, but there are things like Pyrrhic victories, aren't there? That you win something, but you do it in such a way that it's almost not worth having. That the use of 49-3. But also he's actually quite destructive in terms of politics. One of the things that Christian Jacob reproached him for when just after he'd been re-elected, when the parliamentary elections came through, Christian Jacob, who was then president of Les Républicains, said, "You've spent the last 5 years fighting to destroy us." And Macron apparently said nothing. He simply smiled. And then he kind of hopes now that Les Républicains are going to help him pull his irons out of the fire. So, he looks indestructible. He looks like Teflon, that everything flows off him. But actually, he lost the general election. The system is set up so that you win the presidential election, that the general election, the legislative election afterwards becomes a cakewalk. He didn't bother to fight the general election. In 2017, he was everywhere. In 2022, he was nowhere. And the consequence of that is exactly as Elizabeth says, because of the change from the 7 to the 5-year term, the consequence of that is, yes, some legislation gets through, 24 bills, excellent. But when it comes to the really big stuff, that's not succeeding. And that's where he's, to some extent, failed.
Elisabeth Pinault, is it this?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll put the same question that I put to Paul Smith earlier. Is it the same Emmanuel Macron as in 2017? Is he
Of course not. I mean, everything is different. I mean, he was the new
but is he
wonder
when you follow him
this
out,
young president?
when you follow him,
Sorry?
When you follow him
Yes.
you will on Wednesday when he goes to the Eastern Alsace region, is it the same guy in terms of? I mean, is he unmoved by the setbacks that Paul's just described?
Of course, it's difficult for him because he realizes that he's weakened, that he won't be re-elected, that his party is nothing without him. And from the time that he has been re-elected, there are people behind him who are just hanging on to 27. So it's not easy for him to to be the chief of the team, because people don't really want to follow him now. It's 5 years ago, everybody wanted to become a minister, to follow him, and now, well, it's not so easy to be on his side, because if you are on his side, you don't know about your future. So, and well, nobody betrayed him so far in his camp, but many are ready for the future, and it will be a future without Emmanuel Macron. And there are many people knocking at the door.
When you heard there Jean-Christophe Gallien shout, talk about how, well, if France had a system like they do in most of Europe, a parliamentary system, it would already be either the far right or the far left that would be in power. Yours is a party that's to the left. You're part of the same coalition as Jean-Luc Mélenchon's party, but yours is a reformist party. Your political bedfellows, shouldn't they be more towards the center than towards the extremes?
Well, I mean, clearly, I think Emmanuel Macron was forgetting that he got elected thanks to also the votes of everyone on the left, actually, because we did the responsible thing, which was to try and oppose the far right. And in 2017, maybe people could be like, oh, is he left or is he right? And usually, I think, when you say that you're not left or you're not right, usually it means that you're really not on the left. But clearly, this time, people are now fed up. We're seeing how much his politics is shifting to the right. We're seeing that with the declarations of some of his ministers, but also in terms of his policies and his methods.
But,
so I think
if you look at the other intermediary elections, during his first mandate, European elections, municipal elections, his party didn't do that badly. He wasn't routed at any point. So there are a lot of people in the quote center of the political landscape.
Yeah, of course, but I think people now, even in his own camp, are starting to be really disappointed. And we're seeing that in the protests that are happening right now. There are people who had never protested before and who now are protested because they're fed up of the 49.3 being used excessively. And that's really something that affects people. They're thinking, well, really, you're trying to just bypass Parliament continuously. And this is not a fair and a just way of doing things.
Jean-Christophe Gallien, viewers watch the images of the protests and the clashes with police at some, and they say, "Oh, France is having another yellow vests movement." But this is different from the yellow vests.
The roots are quite the same, in fact, in a very decentralized mood. That means, normally in that kind of union working, this is one of the points. The unions came back, in 2018, they were out. It was about the yellow jacket, very organic, like,
Yeah, it was a leaderless movement that
it was our
organized on Facebook.
Thing. It was our indignados in France, but we waited for that, and it came in 2018. Now, today, it's something in between. But the one thing you need to tell about Macron, probably he's the only brand today in the French politics. Le Pen came with the brand of the family, but it's not her brand. Macron created his own brand, but he forgot one thing. After the branding, you need to market yourself through a political party to a kind of narrative, a kind of a vision, and he forgot about that in 2022.
They said that in his first mandate, and he still got reelected.
It worked in 2017, but that was perfect, at least on the political performance. But today, 2022, he won without that, because people voted against Marine Le Pen, which was the only one. But probably afterwards, the political parties, traditional, he didn't kill them at all. They were coming back. In 2024, you'll be running for your own colors, probably not the LFI. That's the real rendezvous. But now, he needs to find a narrative. He tried, we were hoping yesterday, he was trying to get that, breaking up with a narrative. He forgot about that. You need to market your political brand. He forgot about that. There's no way. And the same international situation. If you look at what he's doing, achieving or not.
Does he care? He's term limited.
No, of course. That's the dramatic of the winning of the second winning in the political. Just what you say. When you win, you're dead. The day after you win, you're already dead politically.
But he said when he won, he just said that I have no ego. Now I want to make reforms. That's what he said just after being re-elected. The problem with Macronism, like we say, is that they're obsessed with efficiency. And there's, I think, a lack of political skill. For instance, when he came into power, he said, well, if I give a job to every people in France, if the employment goes down, which is the case, the Rassemblement National will be erased. And the contrary happened. So I think there is a lack of political sense in that.
They forget about one thing, marketing and KPIs. Talking about, employment, of course we create employment, but what kind?
That's the problem.
He talked about that yesterday evening. He was saying, we created jobs, but these jobs don't pay. These jobs don't pay. He didn't say it really, but the people understood that. So, the people they have the KPIs. They know how to evaluate what you're doing. Efficiency is nothing without results that are in the pockets of the people. And he forgot about that. And probably he knows about that. He's not somebody that traveling in helicopter and planes. He's already thinking about it. But he's no way of doing such now movements to go to the people. Probably he won't be able.
Paul Smith, what's the street cred of France right now?
Outside of France, well, I think that there's what's the view of France? I think that it's a very mixed view at the moment. I mean, on the one hand, here in Britain, where we also have our social movements, we've had more strikes in the last few months than we've had for many, many years. I think that there's a kind of admiration still on one, part of the British public rather admires the apparent radicalism of the French strike movement, but there are others who feel we can separate the distinction between the strike movement and the violence of the confrontation maybe of the police and, let's say, for the sake of argument, the black blocs. But generally speaking, there are some big questions being asked about France, and of course, this all ties in with foreign policy and with the relationship between Paris and Berlin. But generally speaking, I think that there's still this kind of sense that, well, this is what the French do when they're upset about things. They have a demonstration, and that's what it is.
This is just the way France is. Charlotte Maviel, you must get that a lot in London.
Yeah, well, actually, I think the banging on the pans and pots reminds me of the war in Iraq in the UK, actually. That was one of the methods that protesters were using. They were banging on pots and pans to try and be heard, opposing Tony Blair then. And you were asking earlier, does he care? I think he cares about his legacy, actually. Yeah. And what do people remember from Tony Blair's legacy? The fact that he opposed the will of the people and pursued this undemocratic, unfair war in Iraq. And I think there's a way out here for Emmanuel Macron. He can take away his reform. He can stop that. And there are occurrences where that has happened in the past. For example, we've seen Jacques Chirac during the CPE, which was a contrat première embauche law.
A youth labor law.
A youth labor law trying to give kind of precarious labor rights to young people. Jacques Chirac decided to actually take that away, even though it had passed. And we also saw that Emmanuel Macron, during the Notre-Dame-des-Landes airport uprising, then he was like, actually, hang on, let me back out and let me take away this law again. So there's a way out here for Emmanuel Macron. If he cares about his future, he can take away this reform and stop this uprising that's going on right now.
Well, I don't think he will take away this reform, but there are things that could happen. The Conseil constitutionnel, which is the highest court in France, will decide on a referendum in 2 weeks' time. We'll see what they're going to say.
Yeah, this is a new thing in the Constitution, allowing what effectively is a recall referendum.
Yes, but with many conditions.
But the bar is very high. If you need 4.7 million signatures,
which
it seems
could
impossible.
happen with a theme like the pension reform. You can imagine that maybe they could have 5 million signatures, you never know. But then you have the bill goes back to the parliament, and if there is no agreement in the parliament, that there is a referendum. So but we'll see what the Conseil constitutionnel will say. We'll see also what the parliament will do, because they haven't given up trying to do things to force Emmanuel Macron into giving up with this bill. But well, he hopes that they will move on. We'll see.
He needs to find what's lacking today, both domestically speaking and internationally, is the French narrative. You know, you don't know what's happening. You don't know where he's going. Probably
There's mixed messages on Taiwan and Ukraine.
Yesterday it was about
It was about that. It was explaining what's going to happen in the next
technocracy.
weeks.
He was not technocratic. He was out of order yesterday. So he needs to find again something. Probably not dropping out that project because he cannot politically assume it today, but probably trying to find, he has no time. 100 days is something that can come from outside, inside. You need to find something that can be moved unless the situation, again, institutionally speaking, not politically, institutionally speaking, is impossible to tackle for 4 years. So he needs to find, after these 100 days, he has not found something to move people outside the pension reform, outside inflation, something he gets the people to think about or to dream about, something to, again, trust him in some way. He's lost trust. Today, it's untrust.
Firing the prime minister, making...
Nobody knows about half of the government. If you move out Mrs. Bourne or the minister, nobody. It was useless. The only thing he can do one time, but he needs to find a good momentum to do it. A good momentum, either positive or negative, is something against dissolving the National Assembly. But 4 years without doing something institutionally, he can't afford it. Probably the legacy, it's useless. So he needs to move somewhere. But he cannot start from dismantling 3 months of street work or something like that. No. He needs to create something, probably. That's the main tackle to this.
He needs, what you're saying is a fast learning curve on how to do politics.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Jean-Christophe Gallier, I want to thank you. I want to thank Charlotte Maviel. I want to thank as well Elisabeth Pinault. Good luck with your trip tomorrow. Paul Smith in Nottingham, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.